Gaining freedom from health debt is really what this podcast and greatmed.org is all about. Putting power in your hands to improve your God-given ability to be healthy. Many people with preventable disease want to make lifestyle changes. They want to improve or reverse disease, but they don't know how. Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor is the resource hub that is a cure for a common confusion about healthy living. Let's have healthy children. Isn't that something that all of us want for our children? And it's certainly achievable. The question is, are we willing to do the hard work it takes to achieve that in a world that's full of obesogenic alternatives, inexpensive, delicious, bad food? It's also full of inexpensive, delicious, good food. And so you've got to decide whether you're going to make the right choices. I'm Miles Hassell, an internal medicine doctor at Portland, Oregon, at St. Vincent Hospital, and we're here to talk about feeding your kids right. So teaching healthy choices to your children is one of the greatest gifts you can provide them. It sets them up for a lifetime of better health and better choices in other ways too. And so you can stop and ask yourself, is my child's health so important that I'll put something else aside, something else I want to do, in order to help them learn healthy habits? By feeding your kids right, we're going to go through some data that shows that we can reduce the burden of preventable disease. Things like heart disease and cancer in the future, things like allergies now, attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, all kinds of illnesses, including obesity, type 2 diabetes, which is getting remarkably common in young people. We set them up for a lifetime of better choices. We teach them self-discipline. We teach them to cook and be self-reliant. And that allows them to be in a better position to help others. You know, one of the great things in life is if you can teach your children to be of service to others. The fulfillment from that is hard to describe. Humans are kind of created for certain things, and one of them is to be helpful for others. It's not about us. In doing all this, of course, you'll also save a ton of money. So a kid walks into Starbucks, and first of all, I say, why are they in a fast food place? Why aren't they getting something from home? Why don't they have a coffee in a thermos if they want to have coffee? Instead, they get a large caramel frappuccino, 72 grams of sugar. Think of that in terms of, that's about 12 teaspoons of sugar. Now, if you saw your kid getting a drink and putting 12 teaspoons of sugar into it, wouldn't that bother you? And yet I see parents going in and paying for their children's drinks at coffee places where they're getting 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 calories in a single drink and spending a lot of money on it. This is crazy. And if you're one of those parents, quit doing the crazy thing and instead say to yourself, what am I going to do for my children to help them be healthier? All these different coffee shops and treat places are traps. They're traps that are designed by really smart people how to get your dollars and your kids' taste buds into there. And they know how to manipulate those things. So don't let that happen. And, you know, we're being hard on coffee shops right now, but we could be equally hard on cold cereals, on these various bars, breakfast bars, lunch bars, protein bars, whatever you want to call them bars, that claim to be healthy or not. Juice boxes. These are all just garbage foods, and you should recognize those. Because what are we setting our kids up for? We want to set up for our kids for a trajectory of good health. Because on one side of the equation, you can have your kids constantly compromise in good food. They're going to be a little chubbier. Maybe they're not going to get as much exercise. And their health problems are going to be greater. Or you can say, you know what? We're going to be a family that has good food. We're going to be eating fruits and vegetables and beans and grains, and we're going to make sure we understand how to make them taste good so that we're not miserable. This is not a route of deprivation, but it is a route of hard work. And in so doing, we're going to improve our health in the short term and the long term. And I'm going to set my kid up for better choices for their entire lifetime. And so let's talk for a second about ultra-processed foods, because that's what we're really dealing with in terms of getting out of your diet. Because most foods on this planet are good foods. But the handful of foods that have been created in the last, arguably, 50 to 100 years are the ones that we're focusing on. And so these are foods that your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize. So let's talk about good foods for a second. Good foods are all of those foods that your great-grandmother would recognize. So fruits and vegetables and beans and grains and meats and fish, butter, olive oil, These are all good foods. The ultra-processed foods that we're talking about, and we're taking this from what's called the NOVA food classification, and these things are in the show notes. These foods are the ones that have been ultra-processed. So they would fall, the kind of foods they are, for example, the various protein powders and protein isolates, the meat substitutes, soy burgers, the flavored yogurts, frozen pizzas, frozen meals of any kind pretty much, the commercially produced breads and rolls and cakes and cookies. They are a whole different chemical structure to the foods that you make at home. So unless you're getting a bread, for example, that recently came out of an oven, then probably watch out. For example, these are all foods, almost all of these foods have a lot of stabilizers, a lot of chemicals in them, a lot of anti-bulking agents, processing aids. They've been processed under oddball conditions that create this group of chemicals that are sometimes called neonutrients. These are not chemicals that your bodies have ever been exposed to. These are not, our created bodies are not used to these things, and we have consistent evidence of harm, and we'll talk about that harm next. When you look at the amount of ultra-processed foods that people eat, which in the United States is roughly 2/3 of the diet right now, so these are foods that are associated with more obesity, more anxiety and depression, actual brain changes. We could call it mesocorticolimbic brain loss, but these are actual physical changes in the brain where part of the brain shrinks. They have higher inflammatory loads, which affects all of your system. They have depressed cognitive function. They have, therefore, as no surprise, they have worse academic performance. When you look at, there's a little bit of breakdown between boys and girls in the next category of thoughts I'm going to have, but I'm going to actually lump them together because there's so much overlap. But sort of neurotic symptoms, being overly concerned about ordinary things, more irritable, more nervousness, more of feeling sad, more sense of nobody cares, that life is not worth living. And these are all associated with more ultra-processed foods. It's just a fascinating group of data. And when you read the papers that we're presenting to you, I think you'll be kind of shocked that your doctor's not talking about this probably. Your pediatrician may not be talking about it. Your mental health professionals may not be talking about it. So who is talking about it, and why isn't it everybody? And that's my question for you. Well, people think of sugars as being bad for the teeth. So are all the whole family of ultra-processed foods. So if you want more dental cavities, then you're going to feed your kids more ultra-processed foods. And in adults, it's actually not much different. Because remember, one of these days, your kids are going to become adults, we would hope. And that means that you're also setting your kids up for the problems of ultra-processed foods in adults, which is more mental illness, depression, anxiety, just like we see with children, more cancers, more heart disease and stroke, more diabetes, more obesity, impaired immunity. And so all of these factors are, A, largely preventable because you don't have to eat these foods. Nobody's forcing you to buy them. They create this burden of disease that builds over a lifetime. And as I've said earlier, they're related to disease in a dose-related function. In other words, the more of these ultra-processed foods that you eat, the greater the disease that comes with them, which strongly implies a causal relationship. And when we think about this, we also think about the sort of addictive nature of these foods. So remember, these foods are created by some of the smartest chemists on the planet. So don't overlook that aspect to it. These foods don't just drop out of the sky by accident. These are created to appeal to your senses. And therefore, we could refer to addiction, if we wanted to use that term, because of their attractive nature. And that leads to out-of-control consumption, strong urges or cravings to get them, failed attempts to cut them out, and this willingness to get a short-term pleasurable experience, even though you know the long-term is harmful. So don't forget that this is a big deal, that this is also a big deal to overcome. They are heavily marketed. They're socially acceptable. If you gave your kid a pack of cigarettes, that would not be considered cool at all by your friends. If you give them a package of chips, who's going to complain? They're just chips. No, they're high ultra-processed foods that are actually going to harm your kids. They're inexpensive, and many of our welfare programs pay for them. They're easily accessible. And also you get these withdrawal symptoms, these cravings, if you don't have them, if you're used to them. And then, of course, parents cave in. So how are you going to fight back against big food? Well, Make your own food. And the book I wrote with my sister, Mia, which is called Good Food, Great Medicine, it's now in its 4th edition. On page 147, it has a whole section just on feeding children. It's the whole book. It's almost 300 pages of good ideas in terms of how to feed adults and children, including ways to make it easy. But first of all, decide you're going to cook your own food. Cook together with your children. As soon as a child is old enough to pick up a knife, they can start learning how to use a knife. So, for example, maybe your 4 or 5-year-old, you can hand him a butter knife and show him how to slice a banana up. Those skills can quickly turn into using a sharp knife on carrots. You have to train them, just like you have to train kids for everything else. But it's very doable, and it'll take some of the burden off of you. It'll bring you together as a family. It'll save you a bunch of money. Have I mentioned that before? It'll save you a bunch of money. Now, your kid might cut themselves now and then. That's life. Then you start making thoughtful choices. So you say to yourself, what are we going to have for breakfast? If we're going to start having a healthy breakfast instead of pouring ultra-processed cereal out of a box, what are we going to have? How about some whole grain cereals? In our book, we talk about something called crackpot cereal. Rolled oats aren't that bad. Steel cut oats aren't that bad. Crackpot cereal is even better. It's a combination of whole oats, whole rye, and whole barley that you cook overnight in a crock pot. Eggs and vegetables. Saute them together in a pan, and you're done. Frittata. Frittata is a kind of interesting thing because it's basically an egg custard vegetable dish that you can make gigantic batches of and then have it in the fridge, and you just heat it up day after day. And you can put all kinds of things in, whatever it suits you. Maybe you might put in sausage meat or hamburger, or who knows what you might want to put in there to make it taste good. Different cheeses. For lunch, many of us just rely on leftovers for lunch. But if you want to make sandwiches, getting healthy bread, especially bread that you've made yourself, and it's not that hard to make your own bread. And once again, have I mentioned you save a lot of money? So you can have a sandwich with home-cooked meats and sliced vegetables, and you're done. For dinner, we would suggest you concentrate on proteins, vegetables, and whole grains or beans. Those 3 things together. Pretty much you can find some combination and just make lots of them so that you can have them for leftovers the next day and maybe the day after that. Snacks. Plan your snacks ahead. For in our household, it's things like fruit or vegetables with something like cheese or hummus, maybe raw nuts. And all of this requires you plan your meals ahead of time. If you're not going to plan your meals ahead of time, you're going to be in big trouble. This whole idea isn't going to work. And watch out for assumptions that are going to make your life harder. So a lot of people think that they should follow some highly restrictive diet. And we would argue the evidence for highly restrictive diets are very poor. And what has the greatest evidence is these omnivorous whole food diets. So these are foods that humans have always eaten. Fruits and vegetables and beans and grains and meats and dairy, fish. So as soon as people start highly restricting their diet and going paleo or keto or vegetarian or vegan, they start losing enormous amounts of whole packages of nutrients that come in food that humans have normally eaten. Gluten is great food for about 99% of people. Organic foods, nobody's ever been able to show that it makes any difference. So try not to get yourself put into a box where you're making life harder for you to pursue a good diet for your children than you need to. And don't lose sight of the basics. What are the basics? Vegetables and fruit, whole grains and beans. Probiotic foods like yogurt and kefir and sauerkraut and kimchi. Sneak them in here and there. Meats and fish, extra virgin olive oil, eggs and dairy foods. And cooking all of this yourself is part of the basics. And once again, I mentioned our book, Good Food, Great Medicine, as a source of a lot of information to make this easier. What do you want to avoid? You want to make baked foods that come from outside the home, like breads and crackers and pastries and pasta. You want to avoid sweets. You want to avoid convenience foods like protein bars and other what we would call food frauds. You want to avoid ultra-processed chemicals like the protein powders. And always have something healthy, such as a banana and maybe a few nuts or something like that, before you have treats. When we're talking about treats, we all have them. We all enjoy them. And the human body is resilient and can handle a certain amount of treats. But be really strategic about it. First of all, before you go out for ice cream, which might be a wonderful thing to do, everybody have a banana or something like that. They're going to eat less of the treat. Secondly, think about what treats can we make at home. We had a really rainy day a couple of weeks ago, and my son and I looked at each other and said, let's make cinnamon rolls. So we made half whole wheat cinnamon rolls. So were they perfect food? No. Were they fabulous tasting? You bet. Were they homemade? Yes. Were they pretty much chemical free? Yes. Were they pretty healthy? They actually were pretty healthy because we cut back on the sugar and we replaced a lot of the white flour with whole wheat flour. So all of that means that this was a pretty healthy food that brought us together. That was really a fun project. And we're going to do it again, I promise. Making change has to happen if we're going to try to do these things. And so do you make change like abruptly and disturb everybody? Or do you make change in a sneaky and gradual way? For example, let's pretend your family loves white rice. Well, start adding a little bit of brown rice to it, and a little bit more brown rice, and a little bit more brown rice. And then pretty soon they're having mostly brown rice and not much white rice, and pretty soon they're just having brown rice, and they're kind of getting used to it. Make sure you pursue as many flavor ideas as you can. Really pursue good flavor. Find out what your family likes that's in the healthy realm, and really pursue that. White flour. If you're used to making something with white flour, start replacing some of that white flour with whole wheat flour. It works in most foods, not every food. We have some ideas on that in our book. Reduce sugars. For example, we make ice cream a few times a year in our house. You can cut the sugar in most ice cream recipes by easily half, maybe 2/3, and nobody even notices. So your homemade ice cream is a far healthier product than ice cream made by somebody else in a factory. Something else to look at is how you can slowly increase the percentage of vegetables in your children's diet. Make vegetables really easy to get to. Have some hummus and some raw vegetables chopped up on the countertop so that it's the go-to for them. Don't have an alternative such as chips that aren't good for them right in front of them, because we're all going to choose the chip, aren't we? But if we have cauliflower or cut up celery or cucumber or whatever, then we're going to have that instead because it's what's there and we're hungry. If they don't like hummus, find something to do like. Maybe it's cheese. I happen to be somebody who just loves pepper jack cheese. It's not very classy, but it's what I enjoy. So you give me some pepper jack cheese and some slice of cucumber and I'm happy. So let's go back to the treats idea a little bit. And treats, as you learn how to make healthy treats at home, that kind of becomes kind of fun. And you make extras, and there's in the freezer. And so when you have people over, you can pull them out of the freezer and have somebody the cookies that Johnny made instead of some commercial cookies. You can have other kids over to cook. That's fun too. Bit of a mess, but it's fun. Find treats that aren't sweet. An example for me would be frittata. I just love frittata, which is an egg custard and we put sausage meat in it. So eggs, lots of vegetables, some sausage meat, and to me that's delicious. For you, it might be something different. But be thinking about this, be using your imagination, be finding out what you and your family like, and pursue that in healthy ways. And gradually learn to replace the less healthy ingredients with more healthy ingredients. And always be asking, as you reach for anything that's not as good for you, say, is this worth it? When we're away at special occasions, say if I'm at a wedding or something like that, my wife and I have sort of a system where when the desserts are out there, one of us will have a bite of the dessert and look at the other one and nod or shake our head as to tell them, is this worth the calories? If it's not worth the calories, if it's fabulous, we just have it. If it's not fabulous, we don't, because it's not worth the calories. And so think along those things. Keep your treats something that's really worth having. Before you have a treat, think about having something first so that the sensation, the need for the treat may just simply go away. And don't have unhealthy treats on a daily basis, maybe once or twice a week. Think about the traps that you might be in. So one trap we ran into recently, a lady came in, she said she couldn't start eating well until after baseball season because she took her kids out for bad treats. She was hurting her own health, and she was setting her kids up for a future of bad health. So be planning ahead for all of these different occasions that may be short-circuiting your desires to be healthy. Don't use ultra-processed foods as a reward. Find something homemade, have it ready to go, and do that instead. And get outside and play. As long as we're talking about your kids' health, remember, your kids need to get outside. They need to get away from screens. Remember that screens shrink kids' brains, just like ultra-processed foods do. So get outside. If you're inside, play together. What's wrong with the ping pong table? That's what I want to know. The living room, if there's no room for anything else, stick a ping pong table there. Socialize relentlessly. Read books that have valuable content. Set life up as something that's fun, but with a serious intent. Find activities that build strength and coordination and self-discipline. It might be a sport. You might lift weights. There's all kinds of things you can do, but do it. And get used to a few injuries. Just like I mentioned earlier, that if you teach your kids how to chop vegetables, they're going to cut themselves now and then. You know what? If you do sports, you're going to get hurt now and then. That's part of life. So start equipping your kids to seek lifestyle remedies now. They'll learn what they're capable of, how their created bodies can actually become healthier. And that'll allow them to rely on these and avoid surgeries and procedures and medications in the future. So in summary, I'd like to remind you why I think this is so vital. This could be a difference between life and death. If you just look at the mental illness aspect of ultra-processed foods. These are kids that are actually more likely to have suicidal ideation. And as you probably know, suicides, especially in teenagers, is rising dramatically. In ultra-processed foods, there's reason to believe, and you'll see this in the show notes, that ultra-processed foods are part of the problem. Secondly, raising healthy children and teaching them good habits is one of every parent who's listening to this, most important responsibilities. And just as you wouldn't bring home pornography for your child, you shouldn't bring food porn home for your child. And when you can teach your child how to make good food choices, partly by example, partly by training, teach them food prep skills, which will be with them for the rest of their life, and create an enjoyment of life that they wouldn't have otherwise. I have one lawyer who uses baking bread as his anxiety tool. He says, I get home from court, and I start slamming a loaf of bread together and kneading that dough, and my concerns just lift off my shoulders. That works for him. There might be some version of that for you. And create a habit of fitness. There are numerous resources. You'll see some in the show notes. And once again, I mentioned the book that my sister and I wrote, Good Food, Great Medicine, has packed with the kind of resources you want. But you can start with the joy of cooking. That was one of my go-tos, or still is one of my go-tos. So if you're interested in the chemistry, then the Science and Lore of the Kitchen by McGee is really good. There's numerous other ones. But whatever you do, consider your food and fitness choices for your children as among the most important responsibilities you have. And in closing, I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from our book. This was mostly written by my sister Mia, and I think you'll find this helpful. Children generally like food that tastes good. This means they usually love junk food instantly. The later we introduce whole foods, the longer it takes to accept them. But kids are adaptable. Even if they weep and rage and threaten to throw up or stop eating completely, there is a good chance that within a few weeks, the formerly unacceptable may be the new status quo. Providing good food for our children is not optional. It's a moral imperative, as non-negotiable as seatbelts and bicycle helmets. With type 2 diabetes now a disease known among children as young as 6 years old, the stakes are high. On the other hand, there's never been a generation of parents better equipped with not only good information about nutrition, but easy access to it. The world of whole foods is not the dimly lit fringe territory it once was. It has shed its Birkenstocks and is standing before us in a white coat and stethoscope. Good food is everywhere, and whole food cookbooks are published at a feverish rate. So you have no excuse, is what we're saying here. Thank you.